If you're making your first foray into the world of video content, especially if it's up to you to film yourself, it can feel pretty daunting, but it need not be so. Today, I'm going to share some tips that I've picked up over the years of capturing high-value content. Most importantly, I hope to shift your mindset to help you communicate with confidence and ultimately set yourself up for filming success. Part 1, getting the most out of your gear. So first of all, do you need a bunch of gear?
No, we're good.
Okay.
Well, not exactly. You see, there is a time and a place for fancy camera setups like this, but as my late Uncle Ben, rest in peace, once told me,
with great power comes great responsibility.
To get great quality footage out of a professional camera setup, you need to have a deep understanding of exposure, picture profiles, lens selection, audio-video synchronization, and so much more. Whereas a modern smartphone like this takes care of all of that for you, and that allows you to focus on what matters most, the content itself. As long as your message is captured clearly and in a way that represents your brand in the way you want to represent it, then that's really all you have to worry about. Many people even feel that smartphone footage adds an endearing quality to the content, making it feel more authentic and organic.
It's an organic life form.
So long story short, as long as you got one of these, then you're good to get started. Let's talk about camera settings. Of course, quality isn't everything, but it's always a good idea to do your best to capture the best quality footage you can in camera so it makes it easier to work with once you're editing it. Most smartphones today give you the ability to adjust a bunch of parameters like frame rate, resolution, stabilization, and so much more. Sometimes these parameters need to be adjusted before you open your camera app. On an iPhone, for example, you're going to have to open the settings app and then either use a search bar or navigate to the camera section. And then from there, you can adjust all your parameters. Start by increasing your video resolution to as high as it'll go. And you can use either 30 frames per second or 24 frames per second if you want a little bit more of a cinematic look. I also like to use enhanced stabilization if I'm going to be moving around with the camera or hand holding it. And then I just toggle the other settings off. To avoid a weird experience for headphone users, I like to turn the stereo recording off. Next, go into the format section and make sure you select most compatible, and that'll make sure that this footage is easy to work with regardless of what editing software you bring it into. And then finally, I like to enable the lens correction option, and that makes sure that we avoid any extreme distortion when we're using the wide-angle lenses. Depending on your device, the settings may differ, but the ultimate goal is to maximize quality while mitigating variables such as shaky handheld footage, or a weird stereo mix, or difficult to use file formats. Take some time to explore your camera settings and learn what your device is capable of. All right, next up,
location, location, location.
Working with a smartphone can be great, but they're not without their limitations. The main one you're most likely to run into is low light performance, or lack thereof. The tiny sensors that they manage to pack into these devices are incredible in the right lighting, but you're going to start to notice that your footage becomes really noisy and grainy the darker your scene is.
I didn't see the light until I was already a man.
You can try to increase the artificial lighting in your space by just turning on more lights, or by moving yourself closer to the light source. But the best thing you can do is find natural light, also known as
It's the sun.
Now, filming outdoors can be great, but it does come with a lot of variables. In most cases, a room with a large window will do just fine. If you do plan on shooting outdoors, just try to avoid shooting when the sun is directly overhead, as that can create some pretty harsh and unpleasant shadows. Another consideration to take into account is sound. Make sure the space you're filming in is nice and quiet and as echo-free as possible. One more shortcoming of these smartphone cameras is they tend not to deal well with something called high dynamic range. Now, high dynamic range, or HDR, is when there's extreme brightness and extreme darkness in the same scene.
Sometimes, in order to see the light, you have to risk the dark.
If the subject, in this case you, is very dark compared to the background, then either you're going to be in complete darkness or the background is going to be completely blown out. For this reason, you should avoid having your primary light source, like the sun for example, directly behind you. If you have a window in your space, try positioning yourself so that the window is to your side or in front of you. And if the light is still looking a bit harsh, you can experiment by adding a thin white sheer curtain in front of the window to soften the light a bit. Part 2, framing and camera movement.
I've been framed.
All right, so everything's looking good, the lighting is perfect, you're sounding great, and you're ready to hit record. But Michael, I hear you asking, how far should I hold out the camera? Where should I position myself in the frame? This part is mostly a creative decision that's up to you, but the way you hold your camera and position yourself in the frame can add a lot to the experience of your viewers. As a general rule of thumb for vertical content, you want to make sure that you're roughly centered in the frame, leaving enough space above and below your head so that there's room for social media overlays, captions, and stuff like that. Now, there are about a million different framing techniques that you can use, but a good one to start with is the rule of thirds. Some smartphones, like the iPhone, have a rule of thirds grid, and you can enable this by just going into the settings app and selecting the grid option. Now you can use those grid lines to align important features of your scene into the frame, placing important details on those lines and where they intersect. As for camera movement, well, that's up to you as well. Consider how you want your viewers to feel while engaging with your content, as well as what message you hope to communicate non-verbally. A mostly stationary camera may convey a sense of grounded authority, whereas filming yourself on the go may communicate a sense of urgency. The angle and the distance between you and the camera can also be used as a creative tool. Putting the camera right up close can be used to communicate messages that are meant to feel personal or exclusive, whereas a medium shot might feel more confident or authoritative. There's really no one correct way to frame your video, but it's incredibly valuable to know how it can be used as a communication tool to help enhance your message.
I've been framed! Waka.
The last and arguably most important ingredient in this self-film content recipe is confidence. I'm not talking about overconfidence or bravado. I'm talking about being confident in your message and delivery. Now, a big part of confidence comes from mentality, mental health, the way you're raised, and that's not something I can really teach in a short informational video. But there is another part of confidence that you're probably already working toward. Simply put, it's about knowing your shit and being prepared. And if you've been selected to represent your organization online, then it's probably because you already know your shit. So prepare as much as you need to feel confident in the content, and then just focus on delivering one key point at a time. If you've been entrusted with this responsibility, then you just have to trust yourself and follow through.
Follow through, young man.
Even with all the subject matter expertise and confidence in the world, slip-ups are inevitable. Don't be too hard on yourself, and remember that content creation is a constant work in progress. I know that's a lot to take in. Content creation isn't exactly walk in the park, unless you're filming yourself walking through a park, in which case that's exactly what it is. But remember that the core messaging is by far the most important part, and that your confidence will come through in your performance. Be prepared, but ultimately trust yourself. And of course, trust in the process. We're all looking forward to seeing what you create.
Thanks for watching this video. If you got something out of it, please like, subscribe, or share it with your friends.